I'm going to get some free Steve Adubato advice. I am living, as do you, in a lot of different worlds. I mean, you work as a broadcaster and as an author, as I mentioned, and of course you teach and do many things. And here at Caldwell University, where this program is produced, I am the president of the Faculty Council, which in some other universities is called the Faculty Senate. I got called on the carpet not long ago, a couple of months ago, the end of the semester, by a number of people who said that in a meeting with my colleagues that I was defensive. Now, I don't have video on this, but when I think about it, I probably was. It was more than just explaining my position. I was told that I had gotten defensive. How do you avoid getting defensive when you are being criticized, when you are being questioned in a very tough fashion? How do you avoid overreacting?
It is a great question, and it's a great opportunity for your audience to really sit back and think about what I'm about to say. I will tell you that the most natural thing we do is to protect and defend ourselves. You know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Forget about self-actualization or recognition. Food and shelter and protection. We protect ourselves. We defend ourselves. We defend our families. So here's what happens. Someone says something about us that we think hurts us. Our natural instinct, in many ways, is to either lash out, defend, or say, you don't understand. And here's the problem with it. I've come to understand, and by the way, Bob, I am guilty of the same thing. And in my book, Lessons in Leadership, I want to make it crystal clear that one of the first chapters and the hardest one for me to write was the following. You cannot lead others until you learn to lead yourself. And in that chapter, you just talked about one area where you were defensive. I must cite 10 examples where I got it wrong and was terribly defensive. So here's my point. You never win as a leader when you just explain why someone doesn't understand what you just did and why you're right and they're wrong. We can go on and say, no, I'm not being defensive, and you don't understand me, and here's why I did what I did. And very rarely will you get the other person saying, oh, my gosh, Bob, now that you explained it, I take back everything I said. I must have been wrong. You're right. I'm wrong.
But I wanted it to work out that way, Steve.
Yeah, right? Isn't that funny how it plays out that way? Ultimately, here's what I've come to understand. Feedback is a funny thing. I often tell my clients, I do a lot of one-on-one executive coaching, I tell my students the same thing. And by the way, when I've gotten feedback as a professor, I want every student to say, oh, my God, Dr. Adubato, you're terrific. But when I look at it, I'm sitting there saying, Adubato, you teach people to accept feedback. This student thought that you were pontificating. This student thought that you were too aggressive or pushy. You better shut up and take your own advice right now. Here's what I'm trying to get at. When you get feedback from someone, you can't argue, and here's why. That's how they saw it. And, Bob, here's the dilemma. What are you going to tell someone? That's not what they saw? You're actually telling someone that what they think they perceived, you being defensive or you being whatever, is not accurate. You're saying you didn't see yourself that way, but they saw you that way. And it's often referred to as Dr. Richard Carlson, who wrote Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. He used to call it separate realities. Their reality is different than yours. And the really great leaders do the following. The ones who are disciplined and have, emotional intelligence, et cetera, they step back and they say, you know what? I may not understand exactly what they're saying or why they're saying it, but I can't lose by taking a step back and understanding that that's how they saw it, and I can only grow from it because that's their feedback. And if I take it and they believe that I'm listening to them, I may have a chance of winning them over. You never win these arguments, Bob, by telling them, you just don't understand me. We never win.
But isn't it possible, Steve, that you could look weak or vacillating or like a capitulator?
If every single time you take a position and someone takes another position and you turn around and say, oh, my gosh, I'm going to be with you because I guess I'm wrong and I'm an idiot, and you know what, forget about what I said. Yes, of course, everything in moderation. But here's the thing. I'm going to argue that, especially in the New York, New Jersey area where we're from, I'm going to argue, and I know the show is listened to across the country, I'm going to say that in certain parts of the country, we're overly aggressive. We're overly assertive to the point where we think the only point of view is our point of view. And I know I'm generalizing. However, I'm going to say that most of us need to take a step back and try to understand where another person is coming from, even if we don't agree with them. And I'm saying to you, Bob, you don't necessarily have to agree with what the other person is saying. You have to accept their, quote, separate reality as they see it and say, you know what, even if I don't understand where you're coming from, my job is to try to step back and say, I respect your point of view. I'm going to try to understand it. I often say to people, ask a question instead of make a statement. Instead of saying, you're wrong and I'm right, I would turn around if someone said, I don't often do this, but when I do it, the game is played better. When I say the game of relationships. Someone says, I think you're being defensive. When you're on your game, here's what you do. Well, I'm not sure. Bob, help me understand something. Tell me exactly what I'm doing that causes you to say I'm acting defensive. Well, when you do X, Y, Z, you're coming across as defensive. All of a sudden, that person's definition of being defensive may be different than yours, Bob, and you realize that how they define it and how you define it is different. Therefore, how could they be wrong?